Okay, quick music disclaimer here. I do not own the rights to this music, which belongs to the rightful owner, who is the intoxicating mind of Dr. Frankenstein. So he made my intro and my outro, and I hope you guys enjoy. Check them out on Spotify and YouTube, and no copyright infringement is intended. Have a good day.
A clear choice of good versus evil, of right versus wrong.
Twisted Tales.
Welcome back to Twisted Tales, folks. So my next tale here, we're going to talk about Susan Smith. Now, it's kind of crazy how I thought about this here, because I remember a fucking made-for-TV movie way back when that I watched my grandparents involved in this. And then a viewer had emailed me about it, and I was like, this is the same case, so I thought that was kind of cool. Now, this one here is going to be an American tale. And it's about a woman named Susan Smith. Well, she was born Susan Leigh Smith, or Susan Leigh Smith, Leigh. Now, she was born September 26th, 1971, actually born Susan Leigh Vaughan. So, she was born in Union, South Carolina, United States, and this is a city with a population of about 8,400 people. And this case goes all the way back, we'll talk about everything, her fucking childhood, marriages, everything. So, this one goes back to the 1970s here. Great decade or whatever, so I've heard. I wasn't born then, so I can't really comment on that. Now, this case received, tons of attention too, controversy, everything. And it's a pretty bad fucking tale. So, let me tell you guys this one. And Susan's life growing up was, pretty difficult. Her family background was not the best. Now, her father was Harry Ray Vaughan and Linda Sue Harrison. So Linda, her mom, was a homemaker, and Harry was a firefighter. So Harry was about 20 years old when he met Linda, and Linda was 17. She was also pregnant from a previous relationship, and they ended up getting married a little later on. Now, Harry and Linda over the years had a son named Scotty and a daughter named Susan, and they also raised Linda's son, Michael, from the previous relationship. Now, like any other marriage, there's always going to be conflict, right? That's how it goes. No marriage is perfect, no relationship is perfect. But Harry here, he took things to the next level. And he drank a whole lot, sometimes that happens, whatever. But he would often threaten to kill Linda. And over time, he'd say, once I kill you, I'm going to kill myself right after. So this violence mainly stemmed from his alcoholism. He got ideas rattling around in his brain that Linda was being unfaithful, and he was just fucking snapping all the time. So, growing up for Susan wasn't really much of a fucking treat, right? Shit was just sideways all the time, just full of dysfunction. And I'm sure, it frightened the kids. Something fierce too. Especially, the parents' attitudes towards each other. And there was a time when Susan, when she was entering preschool, that her stepbrother Michael had tried to kill himself, and he tried to hang himself. And the poor little guy was just a mess, right? And he was treated at the Duke University Medical Center for his neck and everything, because he tried to hang himself. But everything was just that topsy-turvy of a home life. And it made her, especially, a very unhappy child. Some would describe her as unusual and sad, and often at times she would stare off into space and just ignore everyone. But even though she was sad and her parents were all just fighting and everything, she was really extremely close to her father. She'd be totally happy within his presence. So, back in 77, Linda wasn't really happy, so she ended up divorcing Harry. Now, this was after 17 years of marriage, and Susan would have been around 6 years old at this time. So this threw Harry into a wicked bad downfall. He became depressed, and he began to drink more heavily. And I mean, we've all done that once or twice, so I mean, not a good route to go down. But here we are. So about 5 weeks later, the divorce would be finalized, and Harry would commit suicide on January 15th, 1978. So, let me tell you about this. So this happened not long after an argument that they had, and police were called by Linda. So police rolled up on the scene, and this was just in time to see Harry slap Linda. So it was noted that he also broke a window of the home to get into the house. And a little later on after this, Harry had killed himself with a shotgun blast to the old chest. And he was 37 years old when he died. And his death had had a huge impact on Susan's life. And she cherished two items that she had of his. This was a coin collection and a tape recording of his voice. Now, even though she was sad, she did very well in her schooling too. Throughout elementary, junior high, and high school. She was a member of the Beta Club, and that there, folks, is a club for students with a grade point average above a B or better. And even during her school years, she was a member of the Math, the Spanish, and the Red Cross clubs. And she even volunteered in Union's annual Special Olympics. So she had a lot of stuff going on. She did a wide variety of things. She even volunteered as a candy striper at Wallace Thompson Hospital with her best friend, Donna Garner. So candy stripers here, folks, that's a volunteer that's typically a young woman who assists staff at a hospital, and they're usually under the direct supervision of the nurses that are on staff. And even in her senior year of high school, she was voted the friendliest female at Union High School. Her classmates remember her as always cheerful, very down to earth. But it was around the time when she was 16 that she would sort of change. So shit kind of went downhill a little bit. Now Susan's mom, Linda, was seeing a guy named Beverly Russell. And one of Beverly's daughters had stayed over at the house one night. So she got the use of Susan's bedroom. And Susan had to use the couch. So Bev was sitting on the other end. And then instead of asking him to move, she ended up crawling into his lap, and she went to sleep. And although this was a bit odd, Susan was 16, and I don't know, maybe Bev thought this to be a little provocative or whatever. So she fell asleep, but she awoke to the awareness of Bev's hands moving from her shoulder down to her breasts. Then he took her hand and placed it on his genitals, all while Susan had pretended to be asleep for some time. So after this, she told her mom what happened with Bev and about his behavior. And she replied what she wanted to see how far he would go. And even this is clearly fucking inappropriate anyway, but anyway, Susan, she would later file a complaint with a social worker there, so social services. Say that 10 times fast. Now the family then had to deal with the Union County Sheriff's Office, guidance counselors from school, and other family counseling. So they went to counseling, and that lasted about 5 sessions before the family had discontinued it. So it was investigated and looked into further, and Susan ended up moving out of the house periodically, but then eventually moving back in. So February 1988, Susan would have been about 17 here. So she reported another incident of sexual molestation. So this is the second report now. And it was all about Beverly again. So she reported this to her guidance counselor. And her mom had to talk to a caseworker because one had been sent out. Now, they interviewed Susan, a few others, her teachers, her mom. And Susan's mom had told the sheriff's office that when she confronted Beverly about the whole thing, he didn't deny the allegations. So eventually, this ended up going to trial. To which the caseworker had testified on this, and she told everybody that on repeated occasions he fondled Susan's breasts over the top of her clothing. Other things were brought up here too, the way that he French kissed her, he placed her hand on his genitals, and even though all this information was brought up, there were no charges that were brought against Beverly Russell regarding the second series of molestation acts. And there was no court hearing either. This was because Susan didn't press any fucking charges against this guy. And that caseworker, though, she didn't let shit slide there. She took this to the higher-ups. So this was an assistant circuit solicitor named Jack Flynn. So she wanted him to try to take this to court so they could obtain a court order so certain charges could stick against Bev. Stuff like assault and battery of high and aggravated nature. So this could put, like, Beverly away for being a fucking creep. So an agreement was made. This was by Bev's attorney, Robert Guess, and the solicitor, Flynn. And no charges were laid against Beverly again. But the agreement was presented to Judge David Wilburn on March 25th, 1988. So this was then sealed, and the agreement was never made to the public. So something happened with Bev anyway, like they ended up getting him in shit for something. And even after all this, folks, like, the summer of 1988 would start. So Susan ended up working at Winn-Dixie Supermarket. So this was still in Union. And she started as a cashier and then head cashier like 6 months later. And then eventually she became the supermarket's bookkeeper. So she was doing really good with her life, like settling into her new job, and it was her senior year of high school, so she was having a good time. But it was around this time that she began secretly dating an older married man that she had met at her job, so it was like one of her coworkers. So she eventually became pregnant throughout this. But she had an abortion. So this was soon, like, after all this went off in the course of, like, her and that old dude's relationship, after the abortion and everything, she started dating another coworker. And, oh boy, what a twist. Now this old fella here, he'd eventually found out about this, and ended up breaking off things with Susan. So this was rather abrupt to her, and she got extremely depressed afterwards. So, I mean, I guess maybe she really enjoyed the time with him, I guess. But not enough to, like, not fuck another guy or anything, right? But she became so depressed over this that she tried to kill herself in early November of 1988. So she tried to overdose on a bunch of Tylenol and aspirin pills. So she was admitted to the Spartanburg Regional Medical Center on November 7th, 1988. So she spent about a week in the hospital. And it was when she was recovering that doctors had found out that this wasn't the first time that she had tried to kill herself. When she was about 13, she took a similar overdose of Tylenol and spent about a month in the hospital at that point. Now, the supermarket that she worked at, Winn-Dixie, they were very sympathetic towards her, like really supportive and shit, so they allowed her to return to her job afterwards. And it's a little known fact here, like prior to Susan's suicide attempt, Susan was very friendly with a stock clerk there named David Smith. And she was very friendly with him, like, even though Davy Boy here was, like, actually dating his longtime girlfriend, Christy Jennings. So this was in between, like, her getting the abortion, meeting that other guy, she was flirting with this guy. So Susan became really friendly with him, like, more so when she'd return home from her recovery there. And I guess this is, like, how we'll introduce this guy to the story here. So David was born to Barbara and Charles David Smith. So Charles was a Navy veteran, and he did 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. And Barbara Smith was a Jehovah's Witness. So this led to David being, like, kind of sheltered a little bit during his childhood and stuff. They just wanted him, well, his mother just wanted him to be away from the influences of the outside world, pretty much. During the course of David's childhood, the family would move around a lot. They lived in, like, Royal Oak, Michigan, they moved to Putnam, Connecticut, and eventually living in Union. Now, David's dad had worked at a clothing store and then later went on to be a manager at Walmart. And his mom had worked part-time at a lawyer's office and then a dialysis clinic. So she was doing this while she was attending college part-time because she wanted to be a nurse. But eventually, stress of the marriage and everything went to shit, and his father had grew to dislike Barbara's devotion to religion. And even David began to look at things this way. And David kind of, like, sided with his father on all this. So this began to cause friction in the house. And David moved out, and he distanced himself from his mom. So he ended up staying with, like, his great-grandmother, only next door. And Christy Jennings, his girlfriend, says that David's childhood was, like, difficult and very deprived. So that's a little on David here. Now, the summer of 1990 is when the two would actually start dating. So even though David was he was engaged to Christy Jennings, he didn't think his relationship with Susan, was very serious. It was pretty fucking casual, he thought. So he's like, whatever, I'll fuck around with both. But after dating secretly for a year, Susan had found out that she was pregnant. And eventually, this led to David spilling the beans to Christy about him cheating with Susan. So Christy broke off the relationship. And David and Susan ended up talking about marriage throughout all this. But this meant that Susan would have to give up her plans of college, even though she had no idea of what college she wanted to go to or attend, and what courses she wanted to take. She had no idea. And during their relationship, they both seemed to fulfill each other's emotional needs and comfort. But like any relationship, there were stresses, other strains, frictions, and whatever else along their path. And even though her parents didn't agree with shit, David's parents weren't pleased either, because news of the pregnancy, talk of marriage. It was more so because David didn't have a college education, and the two had totally different backgrounds. David was a country kid and she was a city girl. But besides the differences, the two wed on March 15th, 1991, and they wed at the United Methodist Church in Bogensville. That's a great name. And Susan was 19 years old at the time, and she would have been about 2 months pregnant. Now, besides the marriage, David's family had some other shit going on. David's older brother, Danny, had passed away at 22. This was due to complications from Crohn's disease. Now, he ended up getting a bacterial infection after he had surgery, and already in a weakened condition, he just passed away. So, it sucks. So, the wedding went on and everything. So, after the wedding, the new couple seemed to be kicking ass, taking names or whatever, right? And he had big plans of renovating a house that was located on his great-grandmother's property. So, Susan was all for it. This was until her parents had visited, they seen the place, and then Susan kind of lost interest. And after that, she kind of called it a tin-roofed country shack. Much to David's disapproval about this, but they ended up moving in together anyway. So, I'm guessing that Susan was very excited about the house in the beginning, but after her mom and her stepdad saw it and just tore it all to shit, that place was just criticized to death. It wasn't good enough, right? And Susan felt that it wasn't up to snuff. But life went on, and the newlyweds ended up moving in, having fun. And we'll fast forward here to May of 1991. Now, after 3 months after the wedding, David's father had attempted suicide. He took a bunch of pills, and Susan had found him at his home on the floor. He was pretty beat up about David's brother Danny passing away. Now, David's parents' marriage kind of went to shit after this too, and it happens sometimes. The strain of Danny's death, this kind of made things hard for his parents. Then you add in his suicide attempt on top of that, and yeah, it was just enough. The marriage ended. David's mom had moved to Garden City, South Carolina. This is up near Myrtle Beach. And David's father, he was treated for depression during his suicide, and, he was hospitalized and everything. But when he got out, things kind of got a little bit better for him. He met a woman named Sue, and they got married. This was sometime down the road. So life continued on. And then Susan and David, they kind of went on with life. She was working back at Winn-Dixie there. And October 10th, 1991, she finally had her baby. And Michael Daniel Smith was his name. He was born at Mary Black Hospital in Spartanburg. Now, his middle name, Daniel, had been picked just to honor David's brother, Danny. And after his birth, Susan went back working at the supermarket part-time. And she did enroll in several courses. This was at the University of South Carolina. So she was just trying to figure out some shit, since her marriage wasn't doing the best and whatever, but they had a kid, they were looking after things, they were trying. Money was an issue there, Susan was always fucking into material things, says David, so, this, she would often do, different things. Like, she would get loans from her mother and, like, certain shit like that. And that actually pissed David off, because they both had, like, a good income household at that time. Probably a hell of a lot better than it fucking is now. I mean, you're fucking taxed to death nowadays. Like, back then, David earned about $22,000 a year. I think she earned about $17,000. And eventually, like, the money troubles and everything, it got to a point where the two hated each other. And, yeah, I just got a feeling of deja vu there. But, yeah, plus, like, Susan's mom, her and David didn't overly get along, mainly because, like, she would stop by without any warning, give advice that nobody fucking cared about, like, shit like how to raise their son Michael, and it just caused more harm than good on that. And it just kind of seemed to me that, like, Susan just always took her mom's side, so, like, they were ganging up on David or whatever, so, like, he was just fucking defeated by that point. But, like, even that, like, the couple had worked together. Like, they lived together. I mean, that's fucking hell right there. I mean, unless you're getting along or whatever. Plus, the whole kicker here was that, like, David was Susan's boss at the Winn-Dixie as well. And then the extramarital affairs had started to kick in. So, like, even by, like, the couple's third wedding anniversary, they'd split up, like, several times. And David would, like, just leave for, like, a long time or whatever, he'd come back. So it was always back and forth. And, like, even during, like, their first separation, this was March of '92, Susan rekindled a relationship with a former boyfriend at Winn-Dixie, so the whole supermarket was like, what the fuck, right? So this totally pissed David off. I mean, that's gotta be awkward as fuck. Maybe she just did that to be spiteful. I could see that. Like, people have spite. They do things out of anger. So I mean, it is what it is. And like, there was another time here in '92, and this would have been about summertime. Then when Susan and Michael had lived at the home of Linda and that scumbag Bev. So they went back to her mom and stepdad's. So the relationship wasn't really over with, like, David and her. Like, they kind of tried to talk and shit, so it went back and forth. And the couple decided to try again, and then Susan became pregnant a second time. And Susan told David this time, like, the only way that this is going to work is, like, if they bought their own home. So they bought a ranch-style home in 1993. This is at 407 Tony Road in Union. Now, Bev and Linda, they had a hand in helping him pay with, like, the down payment and shit. I mean, that's the least that fucker can do. And the second pregnancy, like, it wasn't such a happy experience. Like, Susan complained about being fat and ugly all the time and shit like that. And then she just fucking shut David out of her life. And she left and didn't tell him much about the kids. So, obviously, she went back to the step-parents or whatever. So later in '93, David kind of moved on a little bit. He started dating another cashier at the supermarket. So, I mean, this is the whole fucking dating fiasco, I guess. Now, her name was Tiffany Moss. So she went to high school with Susan, but they didn't really know each other that well. And Susan was super jealous of David and her. So, like, she would often visit, like, the workplace, freak the fuck out, start screaming at him or whatever. Because she'd always see him talking to other girls or whatever. So she'd lose her shit. She was fucking pretty crazy, so yeah, that was life for these guys for a bit. Even though life is a shit show for these two, like, Susan and David's second son came into the world. This was August 5th, 1993, and his name was Alexander Tyler. So after his birth, the couple put aside their differences, at least for the meantime anyway. They just wanted to get life adjusted with their new son. So all this had lasted about 3 weeks, and then they called it quits again. But even though they were having a tough time in their relationship, like, they didn't live together or whatever, they were still there for their kids, like, both of them. So, whatever, that's how some people, like, they seen them as devoted parents, and that's how a few remember her, you know. But later on, when she was, like, recovering from the birth of Alex, she got a job at Conso Products, and this was as a bookkeeper. So she went on to become the assistant to an executive secretary for the J. Carey Findlay Company. Now, this is like an accounting office or whatever. This was ran by a guy from Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, it was here where Susan would meet Tom Findlay, and he would take her out, like, they'd socialize or whatever, so she got to meet, like, a bunch of new people. And the guy was all, like, young, rich, whatever. So, eventually, they began to date in January of 1994. So, like, they go to the movies and shit, they go out for lunch, go up to his cottage there, because Tom had a cottage. Or, I guess, Uncle Tom's cabin. Yeah. But, even during the spring here, David kind of got back into the picture, because this was like, he wanted, like, one last try to make the marriage work. So he stopped seeing his girlfriend Tiffany, and at this time, Susan wasn't seeing Tom because the relationship kind of got called off for a bit or whatever. And this kind of went good for the two, like David and her, sorry, at the end of 1994. And then Susan said yet again that she wanted a divorce. So, like, they couldn't fucking keep a relationship at all. They were just both, one tried, the other didn't. I don't know, but, like, David wanted to work on things for the kids, because, like, he wanted to have that whole family life that, you know, he always thought everybody wanted. But it didn't really pan out that way, because everything just went a little wonky from here. In a way, like, David kind of got the relationship that kind of centered on the kids, but Susan was still getting, like, the love aspect and the stability from Tom, because they were kind of dating again. But Tommy Boy broke it off because he thought that she was wicked possessive and too needy. So, like, every relationship is back and fucking forth in this. So, then began the fall of 1994. Now, divorce was on the horizon with David and Susan. And Susan was still pissed about, like, what happened with her and Tom and whatever, and they were, like, still trying to work on things. But, I mean, that's nothing new. Like, all her relationships were fucked anyway. And, like, she was working full-time at this time. She was doing a college course. She had custody of her two kids. So, I mean, it was a lot. And then, eventually, she became riddled with anxiety, and then depression sunk in, and she started to take days off of work just to get drunk. And all in all, like, she just seemed to be going batshit crazy. But, I mean, like, she still worked, and on Tuesday, October 25th, 1994, she dressed the kids, she fed them, then she took them, like, right to daycare. So, she headed to work, and then she had lunch with a group of employees. Now, Tom Finley was there, so Susan kind of, like, sat around quietly, right? Asked the supervisor if she could go home, and the supervisor, named Sandy, was kind of curious to, like, you know, hey, what's wrong? So Susan said that she was in love with someone who didn't love her, and then she spilled the beans that it was Tom Finley. But she mentioned that it can never be because of my children. And then she ended up just sticking around the office anyway, instead of going home that day. Or at that moment, actually. So, 2:30 rolled around, and Susan told Tom that she wanted to speak with him. So I guess the wheels kind of got turning in her head. So they went into his office, and Susan spun, like, a whole web of shit lies here. So she said that David was going to bring up, like, some embarrassing shit in their divorce proceedings. Stuff like accusing her of cheating, cheating the IRS on stuff, and having an affair with Tom's father. And Tom was like, what the fuck? So all that shit kind of threw him for, like, a loop. And from that on, he just said, like, hey, our friendship will still remain, but the intimate relationship part is totally done. And it was just crazy how Susan just went on. Like, she tried to get, like, Tom back, and then she was still talking to David. I don't know, like, her whole life just seemed like it was going in, like, disarray. Like, she had some pretty crazy thoughts, I mean, that's for sure. But we'll see how this goes here. Shortly after work, Susan decided to pick the kids up from daycare, and they were heading home. But this wasn't until she seen a coworker of hers from earlier named Sue. So she pulled into the parking lot of a place called Hickory Nuts. So she got to talking to Sue Brown. Now, after a little bit of conversating, the two went back to Conso, so Susan could apologize to Tom about the lies that she told him about sleeping with his father. But Tom was pretty pissed off, and he didn't want to see her at this point. So Susan was upset about this, so she headed out. She dropped Susan back off at Hickory Nuts, and this was about 6 p.m. So a little later in the evening, Sue Brown was having dinner there at Hickory Nuts. She knew Tom was going back there because it was like a work thing. So Susan had called up the restaurant just to talk to Sue about Tom. During the phone call, Sue had told Susan that Tom didn't ask about her at all, and hung up the phone. Now, 8 p.m., Susan dressed her sons up and put them into their car seats in the back of the car, and then strapped them in. Now, she began to drive around Union, just frantically, whatever, cruising around. At 9 p.m., a woman named Shirley McLeod was in her living room of her home, so she was just watching TV or whatever. Now, her home was 1/4 mile from John D. Long Lake. So a quarter mile here, you're looking at 0.4 of a kilometer. Now, Shirley got up from watching TV because she heard a woman crying outside. So, she turned the volume down, whatever, flicked on the porch light, and here Susan was crying hysterically. So when she noticed that the woman opened the door, Susan said, "Please help me. He's got my kids, and he's got my car." So the two ladies went inside the house, and the cops were called. So Susan told them that a black man had stole her car, and he had her kids. Now, at 9:12 p.m., the 911 dispatch had contacted Union County Sheriff's Office, and they were sent out to respond to the call from the McLeod home. Now, the story here was that Susan had stopped at a red light, and this was up on Monarch Hills. And a black man jumped into her car and told her to drive. So when she asked, "Why are you doing this to me?" the man replied with, "Shut up, or I'll kill you." So the way that she took here, she explained her driving. She drove 4 miles northeast of Union, and then he made her stop at the sign that said John D. Long Lake. Then he made her stop in the middle of the road, and he told her to get out. Now, there were no cars around, nothing to be seen, right? So she asked about her kids, and the dude just said, "No time." And he pushed her out of the car while he was aiming a gun at her. And he said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt your kids." After getting out of the car, Susan laid on the ground, and the man sped off. And she said the kids were crying for their mom as they drove away. So Susan just began running, and then she stopped when she reached the woman's house. So after she told her little tale here, she used the bathroom, and then she called her mother, but she got no answer. So she called Bev, and then David, and by this time, Union County Sheriff Howard Wells had just gotten there. Now, the sheriff actually knew Susan. This was through her brother. So they got to talking, and they heard her story. And although the sheriff actually heard the story from the 911 dispatch, he took notes and he asked her questions. He actually took note of what she was wearing. A gray sweatshirt with orange lettering, and that spelling said Auburn University. Now, her face was red and puffy, as he remembers. So she began to describe what the kids were wearing and everything. Now, Michael had a white jogging suit, and Alex had a red and white striped one. And this case wasn't going to get solved tonight. They didn't have the resources to find the carjacker or whatever, but they could figure things out. So since they didn't have the resources, they called up the head of a South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. So they spoke to some officers there to see if they could come help. And they did. So the two officers, they kind of worked together. And Wells collected all of Susan's story up and her information and everything. And then I guess the investigation was underway. So the Union County Sheriff, he continued on the search for Susan's Mazda. So Susan and David had gathered at the McLeod home. And when midnight hit, Sheriff Wells had said, "It's time to head out." So they all went to Susan's mother's home. But on the drive home there, Susan had told David that Tom Finley might pop over, and she didn't want him to get upset about it. So Sheriff Wells had got the search going. He got the divers sent out to the lake area. This is where Susan ended up. And there was a helicopter with heat sensors that flew over the lake and the national forest that was just around there. Now, the divers didn't find anything at the lake, so they needed something else to go off of. So they asked her for a description of the carjacker. So they got a sketch artist in, he was brought in or whatever, And she provided a sketch. Now, the man was in his 40s. He had a dark neck cap, a dark shirt, jeans, and a plaid jacket. So, they had all this information now, and the search continued on throughout October 26, 1994. And they had the area searched numerous times. And there was another organization that started to help him with the search too. That was the Adam Walsh Center. Now that center was created for Adam Walsh. That was a murdered child who was abducted from Sears back in '81. This was from Hollywood, Florida. Now, the Walsh family had started up like a national center for missing and exploited children. So that's how they got involved with this, because they wanted to help her find her kids. A bunch of flyers were made up for Michael and Alex that involved like some pictures, a description, and they just wanted these kids found, right? So, I mean, they made these up, they passed them around, maybe somebody would have seen them. Now, Susan and David had stayed with Bev and Linda, and the house was filled with other family members. Because after hearing the story of the kids gone missing, everybody wanted to help. So the family kind of gave Susan all the attention that she kind of always craved and wanted. Well, kind of what I think anyway. Like, think about that for one sec. She was depressed, she felt isolated, and now she didn't have to, because, like, family were pretty much catering to her every need. And even Tom Finley had called to give his sympathies. And Susan actually shifted the phone call from being about her kids over to their relationship. So Tom had told her to focus on her kids. And that was the only phone call that she ever got from Tom. He never visited, and even when coworkers would stop by, she asked them if Tom had ever talked about visiting her. So shortly after, the Adam Walsh Foundation had talked to Susan. They wanted to have, like, some media coverage on this, some interviews, talk about the missing boys, and they wanted to post their pictures too. So, like, the more info that would get out, it would spread around, and maybe they'd be able to find these kids. So, after about 40 minutes of talking about this, Susan and David had took a drive down to the sheriff's office. And then they all got together. Sheriff Wells had questioned Susan there a little bit. She went into his office, and this main thing here was for the news coverage, right? Like, they wanted it to be nationally televised, so it will play a crucial part in solving the boy's disappearance. And David agreed that he'd do anything to help his sons. And David, with Susan by his side, went on to make their statements. And you know what? I'm going to see if I can find, like, a quick clip here for you guys here to play. So I'll add that in. Just give me 1 second.
More than 8 days since Susan Smith claims a carjacker stole her 2 babies. What everyone hoped would be a joyous appearance by Susan and David Smith becomes yet another anguished plea.
I would like to say to whoever has my children that they please bring them home to us where they belong. I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't do anything but think about them. And I just want to hug them so bad and tell them I love them.
So that's just a little clip there about Susan wanting her kids back and whatever. And even the neighborhood that she lived in, like, a lot of people were putting up missing posters on poles. They tied yellow ribbons around mailboxes. They left their lights on. And they just wanted to find these kids. Like, some had even went to, like, extremes by searching the woods by horseback just so they could find these kids. And news coverage, like, totally national, right? And everybody had seen a couple pleading to get their kids back. There were clips played on the radio stations, local papers had printed off articles, like, you name it. And David here had even made a statement, and this goes like this, quote, "To whoever has our boys, we ask that you please don't hurt them and bring them back. I plead to the guy, please return our children to us safe and unharmed. Everywhere I look, I see their play toys, their pictures. They are both wonderful children. I don't know how else to put it. I can't imagine life without them. And shortly after the news coverage and everything, Susan got hauled back in for questioning, and this was by the county sheriff and soon to be the FBI. So the cops just kept going. They grilled her for a while, and this went on for about 6 hours. So David and Susan were both subjected to polygraph tests. David had shown that he knew nothing about their disappearance, and Susan's test was inconclusive. So they both signed a form advising them of their Miranda rights, their right to remain silent, and the right to an attorney. And the greatest level of deception here was when Susan was asked by the police if she knew where her children were. So it kind of went off the charts there. And she told David that she had not done well on the test. She wasn't sure if she failed outright or what. But she also mentioned that the police had doubted her story. So this was like a little bit of fuck up for them, right? They're like, well, what do we do now, right? And this would have been the first polygraph of many for old Susan here. Because each time that the sheriffs had interviewed her, they gave her a polygraph. And David had only received one polygraph test. He knew, like, nothing where the kids were, so they scratched him out. And authorities had kept finding inconsistencies in Susan's story. So they asked Susan to go back, tell her from the beginning, keep going, right? And they just wanted to see if she'd fuck anything up or change her story or whatever, right? And she was interviewed about 3 times after the initial, like, polygraph and everything. And there was an interview that was done here on October 26th. So it was here that authorities got to thinking, like, when she was carjacked there, what happened at the red light? And this was on Monarch intersection. So the light on that intersection is constantly green, unless a car on the cross street triggers the signal to switch. So if there were no other cars around, like she stated, the light would have not went red at all. It just would have been green, so she could have just kept going. And even during the questioning here, David had met with the officers. He told them about Susan dating other men, and they mentioned that they wanted some names, some dates, whatever, right? And this kind of frustrated David because he thought that they were focusing more on Susan than looking for his missing kids. So now with the information from David, the cops kind of had, like, something else to go off with. Like, they had a little bit of ammunition to fire off towards her. So they ripped her a new asshole about Tom there and how he dumped her because she had kids. So they asked her if this had played a factor in the disappearance of her kids. So Susan replied, "No man would ever make me hurt my children. They were my life." And this right here, the way that she worded that, they were my life. This had indicated that she thought her kids were no longer alive. Now the interview stopped for a bit, but then she was interviewed again later on. This was by an FBI agent named Caldwell. And he pointed out, like, the inconsistencies and everything to her again. So Caldwell just grilled her throughout all this. And he just straight up asked her, "Is that why you killed them?" And Susan responded with, "You son of a bitch, how can you think that?" And slammed her fist down on the table. Then she got up from her chair and left the interview room. During the investigation, Caldwell had made sure to take notes, so he noticed that she would sob from time to time, but there were no tears. And at one of the polygraph tests, he noted that she made fake sounds of crying, with no tears in her eyes. And even the forensic artist who had drawn up the sketch of the carjacker, he felt that she was very vague with the description of the man. Usually, like, if you're with somebody and somebody takes your kids, I mean, you're going to look at the guy to make sure you get all the facial features and everything else, but it seemed that she just kind of went along, like, you know, this guy got, like, a big chin or whatever, or, like, freckles or whatever, so she kind of, like, just gave them the info that they wanted to hear, I guess. And even Sheriff Wells and another agent named Logan, they got on the horn with the FBI's behavioral unit, and they asked the unit to help them with a profile of a homicidal mother. And the profile that they made had fit Susan's life pretty much to a T. So the FBI, they made the profile up, and they described a woman in her 20s who grew up or lived in poverty, was undereducated, had a history of either physical or sexual abuse, or both, remained isolated from social supports, had depressive and suicidal tendencies, was experiencing rejection from a male lover, and at that time, she murdered. And it also states here that during a homicidal act, a mother may view a child as a mere extension of herself rather than a separate being, and a mother's suicidal inclination may often be transformed into filial homicide, and that means like the deliberate act of a parent killing their own child. Investigators kind of looked back at a little bit of a mistake that they made. So experts had looked back, and they noticed when they asked the divers to assume when anybody was trying to hide a car in the water, that they would be done at high speeds. Nobody stopped to consider that the driver might simply let a car roll from the edge of the banks into the water. So they envisioned that a car driven in a body of water at high speeds would travel farther than a car driven slowly. But in reality, the opposite occurs. Since it's driven at high speeds, it creates waves, which actually stop the momentum of the car. So a car driven at high speeds into the water simply just drops and sinks at the edge of the body of water. Now, October 28th, this was a Friday morning, so volunteer firefighters and sheriff's deputies had searched the north and south sides of Highway 49 up near John D. Lake. So they came up empty-handed. Now, they held a press conference there to announce that they had no solid clues in the kidnapping of Michael and Alex, but they had not ruled out any suspects. And Officer Wells had also mentioned that he found discrepancies in Susan's statements. Wells said, "We do not have a car, we do not have the children, we do not have a suspect." After this, the Union Daily Times published a story. Now, this was about the discrepancies that Wells had mentioned in Susan's story. And people now started to believe that Susan was somehow involved in the disappearance of her children. Another issue arose here. This was surrounding the disappearance of Michael and Alex Smith. So Susan claimed the carjacker had been a black male, and many in the black community found the story to lack credibility. They found it impossible that a black man wouldn't be noticed driving around with two white children, especially since it was made public and with all the searches that were going on. So about 6 days later, after the kids went missing, Union County Sheriff's Office received a phone call from police in Seattle about a 14-month-old kid, and he matched the description of little Alex here. Now, the child was abandoned by a man driving in a car with South Carolina plates, and it was parked at a motel in Seattle. So Sheriff Wells called up Beverly, told him the news, and just for a short amount of time here, it looked like one of the Smith kids had finally been located. But it was short-lived. Police called back from Seattle to confirm that the boy had not been little Alex. So Sheriff Wells broke the news to the family, and then a short little press conference was held at the sheriff's office. So later on, Sheriff Wells, Agent Caldwell, and a few others, they had concluded that Susan was lying about her involvement in the disappearance of her kids. So now they set out to prove her involvement. And all the facts in her story, were to be looked at again. The red light at the intersection, the absence of cars on that road, the fact that her car had vanished. And, where the fuck was her car? It wasn't out driving around, and it wasn't hidden in any parking garages. So police began to think that her car was somewhere located within walking distance of the lake up by the McLeod's house. And a couple other things here. There were a couple investigators that thought a media frenzy would kind of help things out, if they could direct things at David and Susan. So a week after the kids' disappearance, Wells met with 12 reporters in the county courthouse parking lot, and he said a statement here, quote, "I don't know that we're any closer to finding the car. I have nothing encouraging. We're following old info that we've just now gotten into. I don't think it's developed into anything as of yet to be any more excited about than yesterday." And after this, investigators contacted America's Most Wanted, and they had them tape a segment on the missing kids. So they hoped that this would put pressure on Susan to confess. But the segment was never aired. And Agent Caldwell, he thought of something else to create, a fake newspaper, because he wanted to do this on a computer and have an article containing info about a young mom who killed her children, served a short prison sentence, and upon her release, married a wealthy man. So he thought this might help get her to confess, with the expectations that she might lead a different life with a wealthy man. Now, day 9 of the boy's disappearance. Susan and David had prepared for 3 news shows that morning. So Susan answered some questions that she didn't have any involvement, and she said whoever did this is a sick and emotionally unstable person. And when they asked David if he believed his then ex-wife, he replied with, "Yes, I believe my wife, totally." After the interviews with Susan and David and everything, Sheriff Wells started talking to Susan again. So he told her that the carjacking was total bullshit. It was all a lie. It was all made up by her. And then he told her that she couldn't have stopped at the light because there were no other cars on the road, so the light would have still been green. And if there were other traffic on the road, light would have been red until, green lights go, red lights stop. So he also said that Susan would have to apologize to the media and tell them that she lied because there was a big outrage in the black community. Now, after he told her this, Susan asked him to pray with her. Now, at the close of the prayer, Wells said, "Lord, we know that all things will be revealed to us in time." And then said, "Susan, it's time." Susan then dropped her head and cried out, "I'm so ashamed, I'm so ashamed." And then she asked for the sheriff's gun so she could kill herself. And then Wells was like, "Well, why do you feel the need to do that?" And then Susan replied with, "You don't understand. My children are not all right." And then she opened up about the crushing feeling that she had while she was driving her Mazda on Highway 49 on the night of October 25th. So she said that she had a desire to commit suicide, and that she planned on driving the kids to her mom's house, but she was so emotional that she thought her mom couldn't even help her. So she couldn't escape the loneliness and the isolation that she felt, so she just kept driving for a bit. So she ended up writing up a written confession about this too. She actually wrote 2 pages up and with a written script, and she was drawing little hearts on it, drawing little hearts throughout the whole confession shit. So she wrote that she had driven off of Highway 49 and then onto the road leading to the lake, because she just wanted to go up there and kill herself. And then she believed their kids would be better off with her and God, other than being left without their mom and alone. So her plan was that the 3 of them, Susan, Michael, and Alex, would die together. She told investigators that she tried to end all their lives by putting the car in neutral and then letting it roll off the boat ramp. But she pulled the e-brake and stopped the car, and she did this about 3 times before she went outside the car and then became overcome with grief and pain, reached into the car, released the parking brake, and sent the car into the lake. Now, during her confession, she mentioned how much she loved her kids and that she never meant to harm them in any way, and that she was sorry. Now, after the car had rolled into the lake, it couldn't be undone, even though she wanted it to be undone. And then she ran towards the McLeod house to establish her alibi, and she mentioned that keeping this a secret was very difficult. So Sheriff Wells had wanted to confirm the confession before he had to break the news to David and the family. So he sent up divers up to the lake. They paddled out in a small boat there, and one dove into the lake, but the first dive he found nothing. So a second dive, this was about 6 minutes in, the Mazda was located, but his headlight had failed there, or his diving light, so he couldn't see into the car. So more divers had showed up with diving lights, so they swam to the Mazda, and this was actually located under 18 feet of water. All the windows were rolled up, the 4 doors were closed, and one diver here named Steve Morrow, he remembers seeing a small hand against the car window, and the kids were strapped in the car seats, floating upside down. Now, this was all reported back to Sheriff Wells, and by the time Sheriff Wells got to the home to tell David, David had already found out from a news report that Susan had made a confession. Wells had told the family members what Susan had told him during the confession, even though they already had a fucking idea anyway, right? So, he confirmed her accounts of rolling the car into the water with Michael and Alex strapped in their car seats. He told David that she'd been arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. Now, immediately after her arrest, people were just out for blood. There were lots of people that shouted baby killer at her and just called her a piece of shit. And all this was while she was being led to a car outside the sheriff's office. Now, a press conference was made to tell about the confession, her arrest, her charges of 2 counts of murder in connection with her sons. And there was also talks of a letter from reporters. This was from Tom. And he mentioned that he did not want a ready-made family. So some began to think that she killed her 2 kids so she could start a new family with Tommy Boy here. So, sometime after, the car was taken out from the lake, and this took about 45 minutes to get the car out. No, because pretty much they had to pull it out because of the water, the lake bottom, the mud, everything like that, right? And the windshield of the car ended up breaking from like temperature change and the water pressure at the bottom of the lake. So the kids' bodies were placed in an ambulance, and they were driven to the University of South Carolina Medical Center, and this is located in Charleston. So November 4th, autopsies were performed, and this revealed that the 2 little ones were alive when their mom sent the car into the lake, and they drowned when the car went under. And Susan's brother, Scotty Vaughan, he made apologies to the black community after her confession, stating, "We apologize to all the black citizens of Union and everywhere. And we hope you won't believe any rumors that this was ever a racial issue." So, continuing on. The night Susan was arrested, she wrote David a letter. And she said she was sorry and that her feelings had gotten lost in the midst of everyone else's sorrow. And the only thing David thought about that was, what kind of person is Susan? And he pondered on that for a bit. Now, the funeral for the boys was held November 6th. This was on a Sunday at Buffalo Methodist Church. Now, the casket remained closed during the visitation and the funeral. This was because of the water damage to the boys' bodies. Now, Michael and Alex were buried together in a white casket, and this had gold trim. And they were buried in the cemetery behind Bougainville United Methodist Church, next to the grave of David's brother, Danny. Shortly after her arrest, she was held without bail at the York County Jail. Now, her mom, Linda, and stepdad, Beverly, they hired a Columbia, Southern Carolina man named David Bruck. So, this attorney here, he specialized in death penalty cases. Now, with the Russells having to mortgage their home in order to pay for this guy, was straight out of Harvard, right? So, he was big bucks. So, he hired Judith Clark to assist him with Susan's trial. Now, the prosecutor for Susan's trial was Thomas Pope. This guy was a very hard-working fella here. So, November 5th, there was a 3-minute hearing that was held for Susan, and she was not present because she waived her right to be present and her right to bail. Now, November 18th, 1994, there was a hearing held before Judge John Hayes, and this is where Pope would request that Susan undergo psychological examination, and this would be to determine whether she was criminally responsible for the crimes that she confessed to, and if she was competent enough to stand trial. Now, this is something that David objected to because the information contained in this, it could later be used against Susan if Pope wanted to seek the death penalty. So, from the time for bail hearing until her trial, Susan was jailed at the Women's Correctional Facility in Columbia. This is 70 miles south of Union. So, she was given physical and psychological evaluations by prison staff, and she was placed on 24-hour suicide watch and checked on every 15 minutes. So she was housed in a 6x14-foot cell, and a light was on 24 hours. So this would be for a camera so they can monitor her. So she was allowed short visits from her family, and she was only allowed to wear a paper gown, so she couldn't have any real clothes and fear of, committing suicide or whatever. So 3 weeks after her confession, David went to see her. So they met for about 1 hour, and Susan apologized to him for killing their sons. Now, David asked, "Why'd you do it?" And Susan didn't really give him any answers. But during the trial, David would find out a lot more shit. So, 1, Susan knew the exact location of the car that sunk in the lake, obviously. But even though divers had searched the area twice, they didn't find it. This was on October 27th and October 30th. So she told investigators exactly where to find the car. So this left David with one conclusion here, that she waited to see her sons die. So she could have had time to go in and save them or whatever, right? But she didn't. Bitch. And when the car came out of the lake, the lights had been left on. And the reason they found this out is because the lights came on when the car was pulled out and was thudding around. So this meant that she left them on so she could watch the car sink out of sight. And now David believed that she did this so she could get Tom back. And on January 16th, 1995, Thomas Pope filed a notice of intention to seek the death penalty for Susan Smith. And even during her time in jail too, there was a team that was hired to conduct evaluation on her. This was a little before the staff did all their evaluation and shit. So this guy spent a full 15 hours in total during 4 sessions with her. Now this was done by Dr. Seymour Halleck. Now he diagnosed Susan as having a dependent personality disorder. So he described her as a person who feels she can't do things on her own. But she fucking killed her kids on her own, so I don't know. She constantly needs affection, and she becomes terrified that she'll be left alone. And she also was only depressed when she was alone. So, even when she was alone and stuff, she became suicidal when depressed. Now, her depression had stemmed from childhood, more so because of, so many of her relatives had symptoms of depression and alcoholism. So, this was kind of her life, I guess. Her dad drank or whatever, she's seen all that shit, he killed himself, just weird. Now, in June, Beverly Russell had sent Susan a letter. Now, this said, "My heart breaks for what I've done to you, and I want you to know that you do not have all the guilt for this tragedy." And this was sent on June 18th, on Father's Day. And Bev and Linda actually separated sometime back in February too, so he was no longer her stepfather, I guess, that fucking sexually abused her. I mean, maybe that played a part in things with her mental health and shit, definitely. And even during her trial, when this was still going on, people thought that Susan had 2 personalities. One that was manipulative and deceitful and caused her to end her children's lives in order to improve her own. Now, she'd also been found mentally stable enough to stand trial, so when it all started and whatever, she was good to go. Now, the jury rejected the death penalty that was brought on by the prosecution, and they decided that she should spend the rest of her natural life in jail, and they took the same amount of time to convict Susan as they did to reject the death penalty. So, Judge Howard, he sentenced Susan to 30 years to life in prison. Now, Susan will be eligible for parole next year in 2025 after she serves her 30 years. So she'll be 53 next year if this does happen. And David Smith, he felt justice wasn't really served because she didn't get the death penalty, but he respects the jury's decision. Now, Susan Smith had no prior history of violence or abuse towards her children. And, her whole idea of all this was very disturbing. Her emotionally disordered life had just resulted in tragic deaths of 2 innocent kids. And yeah, like, what a story, man. Like, she's not all there, I'll tell you. Oh, also, in the final divorce settlement there, David and Susan split the kids' toys and all their clothes in half. And David also got the Mazda car, and he destroyed that after the trial was over. And as we wind down here now, like, there's a couple other things here too. There was, during her incarceration, this was at the Camille Griffin Graham Correctional Institution, 2 correctional officers had been charged with having sex with Susan, and then she was moved to another facility. So this was the Leith Correctional Institution up in Greenwood. And this lady just straight up killed her kids. She blamed an imaginary person, and she had a whole fucking state out on a manhunt. I mean, it's just like gut-wrenching. And there's so many other ways that this could have went, but here we are, talking about twisted shit on my podcast, Twisted Tales. And that's all I got for you folks. I'd like to thank you very much for joining me tonight. You guys rock. And I'm going to try to find a clip here about Susan. So you guys have a wonderful night. Take care. Thanks for tuning back into Twisted Tales.
We began this half hour, though, with the case that transfixed the nation 2 decades ago. Susan Smith, a South Carolina mother, convicted of murdering her 2 young boys by driving them into a lake. Well, she's now speaking out from behind bars. NBC's Stephanie Gosk is here with more. Steph, good morning to you.
Hey, good morning, Savannah. Well, the Susan Smith story captivated the country in the mid-90s. At first, there was heart-wrenching sadness for a mother who said her kids were kidnapped, followed by horror when she admitted to killing them herself. Smith's letter, written from a prison in South Carolina to a reporter this week, is a kind of explanation for something seemingly inexplicable. Signed simply, Sincerely, Susan. Susan Smith is finally giving her side of the story in a letter written to newspaper reporter Harrison Cahill from her South Carolina jail cell, 20 years after she was sentenced to life for killing her 2 sons.
I am not the monster society thinks I am. I'm far from it. Something went very wrong that night. I was not myself.
The last time she spoke publicly was in 1994, a distraught mother begging the public for help in finding her boys, 14-month-old Alex and 3-year-old Michael, claiming they had been kidnapped by a black man during a carjacking.
I can't even describe what I'm going through. I mean, my heart is just, it just aches so bad. I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't do anything but think about it.
But in a jaw-dropping twist just days later, Smith confessed to police that there was no kidnapping. She said she strapped her boys into the backseat of the family car and pushed it into a nearby lake. Now, in the handwritten page-and-a-half letter, Smith writes, I had planned to kill myself first and leave a note behind telling what had happened. She also denies years of speculation that she killed her sons in order to be with a man who she was having an affair with. I have yet been able to speak on my behalf. It has been hard to listen to lie after lie and not be able to defend myself. It's frustrating, to say the least. But Smith ends her letter by raising more questions, writing, this is only a small piece of the story.
Smith's allegation that a black man kidnapped her children was explosive at the time. She now says she made it up to protect the people she knew would be devastated by the news that her sons were dead. It's hard to imagine how this explanation is going to end their pain now.
Twisted Tales.